Okay, thank you. So over to you, Rupert.
Thanks, Peter, and thanks everyone for coming. Yeah, so last year, many of you were, I think, at one or more of the 3 talks that we had in the sequence, which were quite exciting and will be a key part of my topic here this evening. What I'm going to do this evening is, as promised in the literature advertising this event, say something about where we are now, and especially what's changed since we were here together about a year ago. And say something about what's happened locally over the last year and what's changed in the work that we've all been trying to do in the area. And then maybe something about what needs to happen next. And then we can have a wide-ranging question and answer and discussion, which I'm sure will go quite a lot in that direction. And if we want to, we can do some of what we did last year in terms of doing some stuff in small groups or whatever, if that feels appropriate. But you know, the latter part of the evening, we'll kind of judge it as it comes. But we'll start off with me giving a talk, trying to reappraise the situation. All right, can everyone hear okay? Is it all right if I'm sitting down like this? Yeah. Okay, great. So, the place I want to start is quite a long way from here. It's a large state called Florida. It's one part of the United States, but sometimes one forgets how truly humongously large the United States is. Basically, the British Isles can almost fit into Florida, or I mean, England is dwarfed by Florida. This is a big place, and most of Florida has been evacuated. It just sounds incredible, but it's true, or at least large amounts of the west side of Florida have been almost completely evacuated. So right now, they are being hit by Hurricane Milton, which they are calling a once-in-a-century storm. But these phrases like once in a century don't really mean as much as they used to. Like, once in a century, yeah, but didn't we have a kind of once-in-a-century storm about 2 weeks ago? Hurricane Helen. It was certainly once in a century for...
Different century.
Yeah, if only. So yeah, actually what I want to do is I want to invite us to pause and have a little moment of silence and just think of the people in Florida who are enduring something truly terrible right now, and it's quite likely, I think, that the casualties will be even higher than they were with Helen. So just a moment of silence for them. Okay. Now, some of you might, in the back of your mind, be thinking something a bit unkind like, well, they're a long way away. But we've already heard from our introduction here this evening something about the state of play in this country this year, which we are all very familiar with. Unprecedented rainfall, unprecedented flooding, not as devastating as a hurricane, but it's affecting everybody and everywhere, and there isn't any escape. One really good way of understanding how there isn't any escape is to bear in mind what happened with Hurricane Helen very, very recently, which was that the place it devastated the most was a place called Asheville in North Carolina. And the thing which was extraordinary about that is that Asheville is hundreds of miles from the coast and is 2,000 feet in elevation. You know, normally when you think of massive hurricane damage, you think about places on the coast. And the really extraordinary, ironic thing is that it turns out that actually quite a lot of people moved to Asheville from the coast because they thought it would be safer from hurricanes. So that's a little cautionary tale right there. And of course, we've had other stuff over the past few years. When we had the talks last year, the memory of the 40-degree summer was quite recent to us. And there'll be more of this to come. In fact, there'll be more of it getting worse and worse forever, unless and until we stop burning fossil fuels. And it may still carry on getting worse after that, because we may have, by that point, set off feedback loops that we're not in control of. So, the situation is pretty grim, and part of what is so grim about it is that you don't normally hear people talk openly or understand exactly how grim it is. So things like Hurricane Milton and Hurricane Helene and the flooding and the rainfall we've had this year, these are symptoms of our growing predicament. But I talked all about that last year, and most of you were here at one or another of those talks. So what's new? What's actually changed since last year? Well, the first thing that's changed is we've had these bizarre new events like Helene and like now Milton. But there are other more underlying things that have changed that I would like to spend a bit more time talking with you about. So one of them is that the world's temperatures, the surface temperature and the ocean temperatures, have been going through the roof over the last year. So many of you will have heard of the alleged safe upper limit to global overheating of 1.5 degrees. And since we met last year, basically we've gone through that limit. Now, we haven't sort of technically gone through it in the sense that we might come back down below it, and you have to calculate it as an average over several years and so forth. But I don't think we're ever going to go back down below it for very long. Yeah, basically it's done. We're no longer even allegedly in the safe zone. The head of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, Jim Skay, said this week in the papers that the hope of staying below 1.5 degrees is essentially now a forlorn hope. He is an extremely conservative voice. Myself and other people have been arguing with him for the last few years, saying to him, please, please, please tell people how bad it is and that 1.5 is gone and so on and so forth. And he has resisted doing that, but he's not really resisting doing it anymore. You know, it's very, very mainstream voices who are now stating clearly that we are out of the safe zone, that the limit that the politicians told us they would endeavour to have us stay below is gone. And this leap in temperatures over the last year, this is really unprecedented. Climate scientists don't even understand it. They don't understand why it's happening. The best theory as to why it's happening is that what's going on is that we are reducing the aerosols that are in the atmosphere, the small particles of grit and air pollution and so on and so forth, which are up there. And especially we're reducing the aerosols from shipping. And that probably it's this which is the main factor. So, you know, it's unfortunate. We're cleaning up the atmosphere, and as a result, basically more radiation from the sun is coming through and it's heating us up more. That's the most plausible theory as to what's happening. This heating that we're being exposed to, therefore, suddenly as a result of this is stuff which was in the pipeline, right? If this theory is correct about the aerosols, it's just been hidden by the air pollution. So you start to remove the air pollution, and then we see the real temperature rise effect of the carbon dioxide, etc., in the atmosphere. But as I say, that's just a theory. No one really knows, and climate scientists are frankly confused and a bit bemused, scared. The situation seems to be spiraling out of control. You might think, okay, but what does that really mean? What does that mean for me? What does that actually amount to? Let me try to put it in a way which is a bit more graphic and give you a sense of how the crisis is worsening. So you'll all be aware of the atomic bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima in 1945, which released an enormous amount of heat. The temperature was briefly hotter than the sun at the point of detonation. So 20 years ago, the effect of the global overheating from greenhouse gases was equivalent to 3 Hiroshimas globally per second, which is a pretty sort of worrying graphic statistic. So it's like 3 of those bombs going off every single second, releasing that amount of heat into the atmosphere. That's what we were doing by having blanketed the globe with the carbon dioxide, etc., from burning fossil fuels. Okay, so what's happened since that? So that was 20 years ago. Well, 3 years ago, it had gone up to 9 Hiroshimas per second. So the problem, in that sense, got 3 times as bad. And now it's at 12 Hiroshimas per second. So it's leapt up again further just in the last 3 years. So the situation in terms of global overheating on that measure, in terms of the excess heat which is coming into our atmosphere, the heat that is building up under the layer of the greenhouse, is 4 times as bad now as it was 20 years ago. Now, I think that's helpful to understand, firstly, because it gives you a little bit of a sense of how much heat we're talking about. But secondly, because it gives you a sense of how the problem is escalating. So sometimes it can seem that the climate predicament is something which is gradually getting worse, right? But this isn't really terribly gradual, right? It's got 4 times worse over the last 20 years. That doesn't sound to me like something that's gradual. Andy?
I did some sums the other day. So in 1990, when I was at school, we'd taken CO2 from the atmosphere back. It's a horrible term, but it's just slang, to like levels of CO2 last seen between 3 and 5 million years ago, say 5 million years ago. Now we've plausibly taken it back to levels last seen about 20 million years ago. And if you divide that up, that's about 9,000 years a week of compressed change.
Yes, that's quite another quite good way of showing the speed of the change. Yeah, thank you. And of course, this massive excess buildup of heat in the atmosphere, this is what is causing these hurricanes, or what is causing these hurricanes to be so bad, right? It's as simple as that. It's not complicated, actually. Right, hurricanes are formed as a result of hot surface temperatures in seas, basically. So there you go. The situation is escalating. Climate impacts are the result of it. Something else I want to mention also, which has changed quite drastically since we spoke in this room last year, is AI. So why do I mention AI? Well, I could talk about this for a long time, and we can talk about it more in questions if you wish. But there is a direct relevance of AI to what we're talking about here this evening's topic, and it's this, that AI's place in the world, the amount that it's used, has drastically increased over the last couple of years, and especially over the last year, and it's projected to carry on increasing further. And, well, AI uses a lot of energy. I mean, really a lot. This explains, for example, why a lot of the tech companies which were saying, oh, we've got these wonderful plans to go net zero and so on and so forth, they're rolling back from these plans now. The main reason they're rolling back from the plans is because they're foreseeing that they're going to have to use loads of energy to fuel AI. That's not the only worry about AI here. An even bigger worry, arguably, is that AI is an amazing tool for making things more efficient, for optimizing processes. So AI is already being used extensively, for example, to optimize mining processes and to optimize processes of drilling for fossil fuels. You see where this is going. An indirect effect of the AI revolution is that a lot of the things which are damaging our systems and at the root of the trouble that we're talking about here this evening are going to be accelerated by AI. Now, of course, in theory, if you have more efficient processes, you could say, oh, well, so the mines are going to become more efficient, so, well, we can just do less mining then, right? So we'll just take everything from these mines and we'll leave these mines as they are. But that isn't the way that our economy works. Unless you put some kind of lid, some kind of upper bound on the amount of mining or the amount of drilling or whatever which is allowed to happen, then more efficiency simply means you get more of the stuff out. And that's what is happening. So AI is making the wheels of our economy, the extractive, destructive, industrial growth economy, turn faster. And there is very little prospect of that changing. It would require a huge will of the people and will of governments to enable that to change. There is as yet no sign of that will. So these are some of the main things that have changed since we were here last year. And I must tell you, friends and colleagues and neighbours, that as a result, I am a little bit more pessimistic, or some would say realistic even, than I was when I was here talking to you this time last year. So we spoke last year in one of the talks about, it's on the image there, the Community Climate Action image, of these possible future scenarios, which are also in the play that some of you have seen that my work contributed to. A future which is a dodo future, which you can, if you haven't heard the term before, you can probably guess what that means. A phoenix future, which is the idea of our society collapses under these pressures and then we are reborn from the ashes somehow. Or a butterfly future, which is transformation without collapse. Of those three, phoenix is obviously deeply preferable to dodo, and butterfly is obviously deeply preferable to phoenix. I am less hopeful than I was last year about the potentiality of us having some kind of butterfly future. I think that we may, in the next few years, reach a situation where it starts to become beyond reasonable doubt that our society, our civilization is going to collapse. That doesn't mean that our civilization is going to collapse. You know, I haven't said that. It doesn't mean it's going to happen quickly. It could take an incredibly long time. What I'm saying to you is that my judgment is that the butterfly scenario is now very difficult indeed to realize. It may be slipping from our reach. And as well as thinking about how we might transform into a much better future, we need to be thinking a lot about how we protect ourselves against the impacts that are coming, and we need to be thinking a lot about how we prepare for the potentiality of those impacts being extremely severe. Like I say, I'm not giving a timetable here. I'm not even saying for certain it's going to happen. I'm just saying these are the kinds of things that we have to think about now if we're going to be prudent, and we'll talk, I hope, during this evening more about what all that means. Okay, so I've laid some somewhat heavy stuff on you there. Why should you listen to me? Why should you trust me on any of this? Well, some of you by now know me and trust me, which is great, but some of you don't. For those of you who don't know me yet, I'll just say a couple of things about where I'm coming from with all of this. One reason you might want to trust me is that this is what I live and what I work with, as I have done for many years. I'm a systems thinker, I'm a philosopher, very actively involved in trying to create the kind of change that we need, and very closely observing the situation. And in that capacity, I have quite a good track record. So I've been warning for a number of years that we were going to pass through the 1.5 degrees limit, upper limit on average global overheating, and I've been attacked for that, and I'm sorry to say that it appears that I've been vindicated in terms of the warnings I was issuing on that front. I'm also fortunate in the work that I've been doing for many years and the work that I do now in the Climate Majority Project to spend a fair bit of time talking with people who work at the very highest levels in a number of fields such as insurance, risk management, climate science, ecology, government, the civil service, about these things. And many of them, most of them, are becoming more and more concerned. You'll have heard some of these warnings in the public, including in very recent days. But I wanted to mention a couple of specific points about the kind of contacts that I have, which you may not be aware of. So, in terms of the climate scientists I know, I sometimes have off-the-record conversations with them. In those conversations, they are almost invariably more concerned and more pessimistic than even in their public pronouncements that you will have heard of, because they tend, being scientists, to copper bottom everything they say in public. You know, they only say stuff they're very, very confident of, and what they actually suspect or think or fear invariably goes beyond that. And what the scientists that I know suspect or think or fear is even worse than what's in the public domain. Somewhat similarly with civil servants are not able to operate in the public domain mostly, right? They are servants of the politicians who are servants of the people, at least that's the way it's supposed to work. And so the civil service, they can't say what they think to the general public. If they do, and they haven't been permitted to do so by their political masters, they get instantly fired or indeed in some cases jailed. So I had the immense privilege earlier this year of being shown a confidential DEFRA report by a civil servant who took a risk by doing this. This person showed me this report for 15 minutes. They literally showed it to me. I wasn't allowed to take it away, but I flipped through it in 15 minutes, and I must say, even I was a bit shocked. This report was about the state of play of what's called the critical services in this country. So this means things like water, wastewater, food, electricity, the things which we can't do without. Critical systems, critical services. There was a report on the state of those critical services, and it was looking over the next 20 years. And what it forecast was that on a business as usual pathway, I'll come back to that in a second, on a business as usual pathway, most, not all, but most of those critical systems are forecast to be vulnerable to potential collapse as early as the 2030s, as early as the early 2030s. And what would be the cause of that potential collapse? It could be many things, but the thing that they think is most likely of all is climate or eco stuff. But they're also interested in other potential vectors for collapse, including AI, including terrorism, etc. Like I say, I was a bit shocked when I saw this. I am trying to get this report made public, but that isn't particularly easy. I think it would help to wake people up. But you heard it here first. According to the civil service, and these are people, very, very brilliant people inside the Department of the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, we are on track for potential collapse in our critical systems in this country, not in the Yemen, not in Florida, whatever, in this country, by the early 2030s. Now, that's on a business as usual pathway, right? Hopefully that's not the pathway we'll take, right? Hopefully, like, if we manage to make this report public, or I'm trying to get ministers to look at it, hopefully they'll change some things. Hopefully there will be significant political developments over the next few years. Hopefully people like us and many, many other people can help to do things that will make us relatively safe relative to some of these threats, food, water, whatever, stuff we may talk about in the rest of the evening over the next several years. But right now, that is the pathway that we are on. And right now, the new government that we have in this country, albeit that on matters to do with climate and risk management, it seems to be superior to the previous government we had, which is not saying a lot. It is not on track to do enough to radically alter that trajectory right now. So that's why you might want to listen to me. And that completes the first bit of my talk. What I want to switch to talking about now is to give you a brief resume of stuff which will be very familiar to a lot of people in this room. Some of what has changed in terms of what we've done here in the Rockland area over the last year. Now, just to say, obviously, this is a massive change of scale that I'm making here now, right, from talking about the whole globe or even the whole of Britain to Greater Rockland, right, which is not the same in scale as even Greater London. This kind of switch of scale is inevitable, though, right? The climate and nature predicament is a global predicament, But if we're going to effectively tackle it, a lot of that effective tackling of it is not going to happen at a global level. Some of it might. I mean, that's what the COPs and the IPCC are for, but they don't seem to be working out very well. In my view, and the view of a lot of other people who I respect, is that a lot of the work that's going to have to be done to address the crisis that we're in and to make ourselves safer in response to it is going to be at the national level, at the regional level, at the local level, at the hyper-local level, at the household level, at levels that are far, far lower than the global level. So don't be bemused by this switch of scale. It's right and inevitable that quite a lot of our focus for a lot of the people in this room is around here. Right? There's only so much that we can do to influence what happens at the COP meetings or whatever. There's a lot more we can do to influence what happens here. So what's happened here over the last year? Well, I'm delighted to say that partly as a result of the talks and the events that were hosted by South Yare Wildlife last year, we've got some really encouraging developments that have occurred over the last year. We are, I would venture to say, starting to do our bit. So let me name a few of them, and you know, people in this room are key players in a number of these things. So a key result of the talks last year was the birth of the 5 Mile Network, and the idea of the 5 Mile Network is to gather people in the Greater Auckland area once a month to, in very practical ways, look at stuff to do with resilience. Mainly so far it's been stuff to do with food, sharing seeds, sharing plants, sharing tips, sharing produce, etc. We meet once a month on the first Monday of every month. To those who are in the room who haven't been before, I would encourage you to go. It's brilliant. There are people here who are regular participants. Anyone want to throw in something about the 5 Mile Network? Do you agree that it's brilliant? What do you like about it? Rose?
Getting free stuff.
Yeah.
Getting tips from people. Everyone's got their own different expertise. So some people are really brilliant at pruning trees. Some people are good at growing beans. Some people are good at preserving things. And you just sort of learn a lot, and it's just nice social as well.
It is very, very social, isn't it? And we spend ages gabbing, and then we kind of force ourselves to sit in a circle for a while as well. And yeah. And Rose has very kindly volunteered to host a special Solstice Eve gathering that we're going to have down at Wheatfen, if anyone's enthused to come and join us for that. And we're going to have some alcoholic beverages and a fire down there. And there'll be we'll be starting again with the regular 5 Mile Network meetings at the start of March next year. 5 Mile Network, there is a Facebook page if your people are keen. There is also a WhatsApp group. So can we have a quick show of hands? Who here is a sort of semi-regular attender of the 5 Mile Network? If you could put your hands up, right. So those of us who just put our hands up. Those of you who haven't, if anyone wants to find out more, do speak to one of us. But maybe we'll talk about it, you know, during the rest of this meeting here as well. So that's super encouraging. And the sort of the root idea of the 5 Mile Network is, what if there comes a time when we actually have to rely for most of what we live on what is within a 5 mile radius of us, which is an incredibly challenging idea, but fits with the early part of my talk in terms of being a challenge that we should take seriously in the times that we're moving into. Another thing that came from our events here last year was the idea of let's do a community orchard. My incredible wife Juliet, who's over there, led on this and fundraised for it, and the parish council supported it. Juliet's on the parish council, and lots of people in this room turned up to create the community orchard. I mean, the day of the creation of the community orchard, those of you who weren't there, it was absolutely amazing. In about 80 people came. I mean, Rockland has a population of like a bit less than 1,000, right? It's an unbelievable percentage of the people in the area turning up to participate. I mean, it was actually overwhelming in the sense of some of the late arrivals. There were no trees left for them to plant, and we had to encourage some of them to come back another day, which we then did and planted more trees. There was enormous enthusiasm, and again, you know, I think a lot of fun was had by all. The community orchard is flourishing. flourishing despite the best efforts of the rabbits, which have had a brilliant year with the relatively mild weather. Only one tree, as far as we can tell, has been killed by the rabbits so far, which is a pretty good percentage. Juliet, do you want to say anything very quick about what's next for the community orchard?
We are hoping to have our sale in January, and we're talking to our friends Vicar, Nick and Helen, about doing something in January, so there'll be more on that. So we can sing to our trees, and something about toast, if anyone knows what the connection is there in your saving.
And have some cider.
Toast apparently features.
Yeah.
So hopefully cider and singing up at the orchard. We are always looking for people to come help, do bits and pieces there. We had a picnic there just towards the end of summer and did a bit of pruning, thanks to Kathy for all of her help on that, Kathy Terry. And thanks to South Hill Wildlife Group, of course, because they hosted, supported and been incredibly active on the orchard, including the badges right from the very start, and thanks to the community reserve folk, and of course to our amazing councillors and our chair of the parish council, who's brilliant.
Yeah, so the community orchard is there, and hopefully it's going to flourish, and hopefully it'll be the start of something much bigger. You know, the kind of part of the direction I'm going in with this is, I believe that we need things like the 5 Mile Network to really flourish. I believe that we need the community orchard that we've got so far to be the start of something much bigger, and this is some of the stuff I'm hoping we might talk about as this evening goes on. A couple other things I'll just reel off a bit more quickly. Steve, the local caretaker, has been doing wonderful vegetable growing with the kids at the school here. Then there's some hyper-local things that are happening around the village since last year. Our close, after my talks, got together, several of us neighbours, and we formed a tiny Facebook group called Saving the World One Close at a Time, and we had an apple day where we all gathered our own apples and some apples we scrumped and whatever, and juiced them and got loads of amazing lovely apple juice for ourselves, and that was absolutely wonderful. Yeah, so these are some of the main initiatives that have occurred here since last year. It's also possibly worth mentioning that, of course, since last year we've got quite a turnover of MPs in Norfolk, which may be encouraging. We've got the first ever Green MP in the east of England in southern Norfolk. In this constituency right here, we've got a new MP who I'm told is very good and responsive. You might kind of still feel, after I've said all this, yeah, but does this really match in scale the scale of the predicament? And just firstly repeat what I said a few minutes ago. Well, in a sense, it's completely unsurprising that it doesn't. I'm talking here about what's happening locally, and what needs to happen is that the kind of thing that's happening here locally needs to happen everywhere locally, and there needs to be more of it. And that's the other part of the question of scale. My belief is that we need to take what has started here and soup it up. The 5 Mile Network needs to become a lot bigger, a lot stronger, a lot kind of wider. We need to have more community orchards. We need to have market gardens back in the area. We need to kind of generalize the point. We need to focus our minds and ourselves collectively on building resilience, on bracing for impacts, on softening those impacts, while also in the process, of course, reducing our own collective impact upon the planet. This is the kind of way that we could potentially become safer, that we could potentially adapt to the scary new world that we are moving into. And we are moving into it. A world which will likely see, for example, in this country, something which we've only just begun to see, which is wildfires. This is one of my fears for this area, that we could, in future years, if we have more summers like that, 40-degree summer, be very vulnerable to wildfires. We need to be thinking about how to prepare for that minimise the chances of that being devastating. We need to think about water storage for future very dry years. We need to think obviously about how we cope with flooding, ground saturation, rainfall extremes, etc. in years like the year we're having right now, or years that could be worse. We need to think about how we build up our food resilience. Something like the 5 Mile Network is the beginnings of that, but it's just the beginnings of it. We need to think about how we do all of this in a way which is friendly to nature, going back to the idea of us being here under the auspices of South Yare Wildlife Group. You know, like, can some of those front gardens, those lawns on the street in Rockland be turned not just into greenhouses or vegetable beds, but into wildflower meadows, or into miniature bits of agri-wilding or tiny fragments of orchard. You know, one of the ideas for how one might go further in terms of the orchard project is, as well as having like in-place orchards, you can have what are called virtual orchards, which are when you have, you know, 2 trees here and 5 trees there, and then they all add up into something which makes an orchard. Many of us in this room, I think, are intending to stay here and make our lives here. And one way of putting what I'm saying is that we need, if we're serious about that, to be prepared to make our stand here and to think about how we do these things together in an uncertain context, but a context where I'm afraid we know that the kinds of impacts that I was speaking about earlier, which have escalated over the last year, are going to carry on escalating for a very long time to come. In the best scenario, they will carry on escalating for a very long time to come. That is fact. So we need the work that we do to be work that we do together, to be community building. We need these kinds of conversations to be deep reflections, but not just talking shops. And we need to think very seriously about how we might scale up. And that is the challenge that I want to offer here this evening. And I'm now open to questions, and let's talk about it. Thank you so much for listening so far. Who would like to get the ball rolling by asking a question or making a comment about any aspect of that?
Well, first, one of the things that comes to mind is, how do we counter the people who don't believe like that, and the people with big vested interests, like the agrichemical, the oil companies,
Yeah.
going to put out lots of, who accept that climate change is going on, but say they've got the solution by doing this and that, and saying they're already doing all these things, they're already at net zero or something like this, you know. And there's quite a lot of that going on the media now. There's a lot of adverts saying they're at net zero, these big companies, and you think, surely they're not.
Yes, well, okay, thanks, Peter. They're not, yeah. As I said, something which is happening right now, which is not being advertised very much, is that quite a few companies are actually scaling back their net zero commitments. The fossil fuel companies are, as well as the tech companies. And the fossil fuel companies and the tech companies are about the most powerful companies there are in the world today, and in more or less in this country as well. So, protestations that enough has been done and it's in hand are completely invalid, as of course is disinformation, lies about the hurricanes and about climate and so on and so forth. Now, I'm happy to spend more time talking about what we do about those things here this evening, but I think that we should be careful not to get dragged into a huge discussion of that, because those are huge topics. One thing I would say is that anyone who is more or less kind of denialistic on these questions, anyone who is saying, oh, there really isn't that much of a problem, or the companies have got it covered, or anyone who is, you know, really kind of blatantly unrealistic, I wouldn't bother engaging with them too much. You know, the people who it's important to engage with are the people who are here this evening, are the other people who would like to be here this evening but for whatever reason can't be, are the people who came to the other talks last year, are the many who are kind of concerned but don't quite know what to do, and also some of those who are actually not that concerned but just don't really know. Or just sort of kind of trying not to focus on it too much. Some of them too are worth talking to. But the people who are actually kind of like, no, it's not really a problem, or no, don't worry about it, they've got it covered, etc. I would not waste too much of your time on those people. What you do need to make sure is that they don't derail the debates and discussions, and that they don't derail action. Another key point I would make here is, of course, a lot of what we do doesn't need to be badged up front as being about collapse prevention or about mitigating or adapting to climate even, right? So for example, with the community orchard, right, the vast majority of the people who were there, for all I know, were basically thinking, this would be lovely, this is a nice day out for the kids, wouldn't it be great to have some trees, wouldn't it be great to have some free apples, let's reinforce the community a bit together, and you know, that's all great, right? And that feeds into the sense in which there are potentially, and this is, you know, one of the reasons for deep optimism, I think, in the face of some of the somewhat worrying things that I relayed to you in the first part of my talk this evening. A lot of the things which we actually need to do, right, in terms of building local resilience, in terms of making ourselves stronger against impacts, etc., are things which are fun and make you more healthy and will build community and people want to do anyway, etc. You know, it's quite striking, isn't it? When I asked about the 5 Mile Network, one of the first things Rose said was, yeah, it's really sociable and people love talking to each other there and so on and so forth, right? So we don't necessarily need to worry about the very valid and important stuff that you're mentioning quite as much as we sometimes think, because we can actually kind of make a bit of a kind of sidestep around most of it by a lot of the time focusing on, okay, what are the things which are kind of real kind of win-wins here? You know, what are the things we can do which will make our community more resilient, which will help us be better prepared against some of the terrible shit that may be coming down the pike at us, which will reduce our carbon footprint in the process, which will rebuild community, which will be fun, which will be healthy. There are very often big overlaps between these things. I think we want to really look for and ruthlessly pursue those overlaps. I wonder if someone wants to kind of respond to this point before we take more questions or comments.
Made me think about the concept of focusing on your circle of influence, which is something we talk a lot about in social enterprise. So if you imagine a circle that's, you know, got Rockland in it and all our land and us and what we can do ourselves, that's our kind of circle of influence. And then, you know, the oil companies or whatever, they're much further out and they're beyond our circle of influence, even though we wish we could influence them. And the more energy you put into your circle of influence and the less you scatter outside your circle of influence, the bigger the impacts that you can make. So we were talking about this in the South Year Wildlife Committee about, you know, how dreadful things are and how do we stop ourselves feeling demoralised because the task just seems so massive. And well, we just said it's got to be fun. It's got to be fun for us and enjoyable, and and that's what you were saying. And, you know, some people in the local area we can influence, like each other who want to join in, or like you say, people who want to come and have a fun day out, or got an allotment, or whatever. But, you know, we can't influence agricultural policy or, you know, local. Well,
we might be able to, but I think the point is it's a lot further out in our circle, right? That the closer the circle is to you, the more influence you've got.
Exactly, and just to celebrate what we have done. And when you were talking, I was thinking about how if we want the 5 Mile Network and related things to grow and to thrive, and if we want that to then spread and, you know, change the world at one close at a time, I wonder whether there's some way that we could document or record or measure our social impact, almost make a case study of ourselves that we could then show to other people. We're thinking about in lockdown, everybody was talking about the village of Risby, weren't they, Kathy? And you pioneered selling a wildlife friendly village, and you were really inspired by the village of Risby where everybody got involved, you know, all the people who lived there and the parish council and the school, and they made this incredible wildlife friendly village. And that inspired us, and particularly Kathy, who put all the energy in and spearheaded it to replicate it where we were, because we could see this lovely example. So if we could somehow show other people what they're achieving and inspire them to do the same, maybe we could have more of a ripple effect outside of our circle of influence and start to have a wider influence.
That seems to me a great thought, and there's various ways we could follow that up. So Juliet wrote a little article, for example, about the Apple Day that we had. There's things like that. I mean, I wonder if there's scope for things maybe about tonight's meeting, maybe about the 5 Mile Network, maybe about the community orchard. I don't know. There's numerous possibilities here. In, say, 11 Says, or in the EDP, or, you know, etc., etc. If there's some of us here who could do some of that documenting and recording and spreading out the ripples, that seems to me very worthwhile. Maybe that's something we want to talk about more. Did you have something?
Well, I could do. What's your attitude to solar panels?
To solar panels?
Solar panels.
Yeah.
I've got some on my roof, for example.
Yeah.
I've had since December 2011.
Yeah. Great, yeah. So Juliet and I have just got solar panels last year, and yeah, basically solar panels are, you know, they're not cheap. Hopefully the new government may change that, but they are obviously incredibly worthwhile in terms of enabling you to not necessarily get off grid, but to significantly reduce the amount of dependence that you have on the energy that comes from the national grid, and including obviously fossil energy. Now, part of my interest in solar panels, and that includes solar hot water as well, is that the more solar panels we have, the closer we are to getting ourselves into a situation where we are not completely dependent on the national grid for our power. I mean, it's as simple as that. So if we go back to the thing about the DEFRA study, and the vulnerable critical systems being at risk of collapse, right? The more of us who have solar panels, solar hot water, and things like that, the less we are at risk of being caught up in such a potential critical systems collapse. So one of the things that I want to look into as soon as I get a minute is how we can, in our house, isolate our solar panels from the grid altogether, so that the battery that we have could continue to operate even if there was a power cut. Because I understand that that is possible, but our system isn't set up in that way. So when there was a power cut last year, our lights went off along with everybody else's. But what I'm hoping is that as soon as I do this thing, which I think is a fairly simple thing to do in the control thing, that won't be the case anymore. So this is an example of how we become, you know, more kind of resilient and less open to disaster.
We just commissioned some solar panels at our place in Seething, and I had exactly the same thoughts. Going on from that, what would your thoughts be about trying to have a community infrastructure of off-grid power?
Yeah.
Is that anything that you...
They've been banned. The last government passed legislation to make it illegal to set up.
Well, that's not quite true. They made it difficult.
I thought they said that it was essentially illegal to to set up parallel power networks.
No, it's not quite. I mean, they do exist. There are a few. They just made it really hard.
So I thought that the Tories had my reading of it was that they basically made it impossible for anyone else to do it.
Yeah, I wouldn't say impossible. They just made it hard. I think the new government is going to make it less hard, but this is partly about not accepting kind of corporate power domination of the electricity sector. So the short answer to your question is yeah, I think it'd be brilliant, right? It's obviously something which is badly needed, and there are other countries, including European countries, where there is a lot more of this. And it also helps people, of course, to accept renewable energy much more, right? People are not necessarily very keen on having some big wind turbine in their area if it's just going to be owned by some profit-making company. But if it's owned by them, well, that's a different matter.
There's a community wind turbine in Bristol, isn't there?
That's right, yeah. That's right. That's one of the very encouraging actual examples that has been achieved. So yeah, I think it'd be brilliant. I think it's something which would be wonderful for us to aspire to here, and similarly in other places, would be community renewable energy. And you can think about the sort of community principle in a number of ways or on a number of levels. Like you could potentially, for example, have some kind of district heating grid, or even ultimately a district electricity grid. But I think the obvious place to start is with like community power, literally community power. I think it'd be brilliant if we were to try to get something like that going in Rockland, in Seething, etc.
On a similar thing, but going back to sort of household level, there's a lot of different schemes out there. It seems there's different ways of accessing grants or various ways to get panels or batteries or whatever it is, but they're obviously very confusing. You don't know which ones are. I get adverts all the time saying, oh, it all looks too good to be true, and I'm assuming that's probably because it mostly is. So is there, at a local level and using connections you have and people in here, a way of filtering what are the schemes that work? How do you define whether, because obviously producing solar panels has an embodied energy cost, answering some of those questions so people can say, actually within 10 years the embodied energy of the panels will be dealt with, plus my impact of getting the power from the grid is reduced. So be able to have some of those, the maths basically. Of, am I doing the right thing? What's the best way to do it that's most affordable and impactful for me and my family? And I guess it dispels some of those myths, because there's all of that anti-electric car rhetoric sort of pointing to the cost of the batteries and where those materials come from. And I'm sure a lot of that's true. But how do you do the weighing up? I think a lot of people struggle with.
Absolutely.
One last bit, of course, lots of us who make these changes, lucky enough to be able to afford to do so. And there are a lot of people who can't. So how, at a community level, are there ways to, I don't know, if 20 households all get something done, is there a way to make that cheaper for people who can't afford it?
So that's how community power obviously could be exciting. There is Norfolk Solar Together, which is a way that people can go in together to get a slightly lower rate, which makes it a bit more affordable. When Juliet and I got our system last year, part of the reason we decided to go ahead and get it is you can still get these incredible grants for putting in an air source heat pump, which slashes the price of that to very, very low. So we've got combined solar panels and air source heat pump, which means that we can, for most of the year, we can heat the house easily without drawing anything from the grid. But your basic point is absolutely right, Jake, right? This information should be made available by the government or some quango in a really accessible way, and it isn't. So when we were looking into getting our system, it took quite a while, and I thought, this is ridiculous. I know loads about this stuff, and I'm still like in a situation of being like kind of at a bit of a loss when I started out. So who can I trust? What do I go to, etc. In terms of installation, we went with a local guy, Neil Farrow, who came to one of the meetings last year, who we can on balance definitely recommend. I think that's one of the things we need to do, right, is just kind of willy-nilly spread that kind of information about when people have a good experience, or for that matter, a bad experience in relation to some solar provider, heat pump provider, etc. Let's spread that around. But yeah, really, the ultimate solution would be that there was that that there was some kind of organisation, ideally a state organisation, otherwise, you know, it has to be something which is well resourced, which would do that filtering. I'm not sure that we, as it were, here are capable of doing that filtering, but I think we can help make a gesture in that direction by making sure that whatever information we do have, we kind of share around and create a bit of a sort of de facto emerging kind of semi-filter.
Our new MP seems quite keen on those sorts of things.
Okay.
It might be worth, I mean, you were wanting to get him over to South here anyway.
Yeah.
It might be one thing, you know, his view was very much party line because the Labour Party are prioritising so-called green energy, alternative energy.
Yes.
And he was more up for that than he was just the natural environment per se, I felt.
Yes, because it's one of their missions. They've got these missions. I mean, one way of describing what I was trying to say to you in the early part of my talk in relation to this country was it really ought to be a mission for the government to protect us against what is coming. But it isn't, and I'm working with others to try to change that. And unless and until it does change, we need to step up and start doing more of it ourselves. But I think you're absolutely right. It'd be brilliant to quiz the local MP about some of these things we're talking about here this evening, including this kind of filtering one. So let's see if we can make that happen. Great.
Norfolk, a few years ago,
Yeah.
they in fact tried to get people to go for solar. And the idea was that they would get a number of people by a certain date, and then they would actually go out for competition.
Yeah, I think you might be thinking of Norfolk Solar Together.
It could well be.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, if South Norfolk were doing it,
Yeah.
I think they were.
That's right.
Norwich City and Broadland were also.
Yeah.
involved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. So that is a possible way you can do it, and then you do have a bit of kind of reassurance that you're going in with a scheme that the council has kind of got some oversight of, and you've got a slight discount. We didn't go with that in the end because we didn't think the discount was really worth it.
I think sometimes they've actually said, you know, they didn't actually get a competitive bid
Right.
from any of the main
Yeah.
suppliers.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing I was thinking about was a community car share. I mean, certainly a few years ago in Reefham, they had community car share. And it was based in the centre of Reefham. And basically anyone could use the car.
Sounds a great idea. I guess the key thing there is it requires some kind of resource or effort to set it up.
Yeah.
So that's often where these things, you know, come down, right? Is there someone who might be motivated to do something like that? I don't know, on a non-profit basis or something.
I don't know how true it is, but I've heard rumour that the housing development by the Petcher Way has been given some approval, and I'm assuming the developer, as part of that, will have to make some contribution to offset the environmental damage that development does. So is being propositional with ideas of what those things could be something worth considering.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. That would be so-called Agenda 21 funding.
Well, I guess they could aim for biodiversity net gain, but there's also with the Rockland Play Park, I think the play equipment was replaced to some kind of connection to the construction.
So in theory, something like the money that they will be we hope required to stump up could fund something like a community car share or something. That's what you're thinking.
Yeah, or something of that nature, or
great.
another orchard, or another, you know, public space. Because when you think about the orchard, you think, well, that's the one community space Rockland really has. Is that park? There's not much more. We're limited. Well, it's only how many orchards do you want ultimately, but we are limited with the amount of space accessible. The negative that comes from development could turn into a positive.
Yeah, and that's partly why I mentioned the virtual orchard possibility. But what I also think is that in terms of over the coming days, weeks, months, years, we should really think about what more land we may be able to get hold of or use together. So there is not all the land in the area is owned by the farmers who seem reluctant to part with it. There are bits which are not, and we should think about whether we want to, some of us want to go in together and take some of that land and turn it into orchard or market garden or even grain or whatever. That's the kind of thing we'll be doing if we're really wanting to think about how might we make ourselves somewhat more safe and resilient here.
The other thing I've been aware of again in Bristol is that kind of library of things, but
Yes.
tools. So I mean big tools and sewing machines and stuff. We'd need somebody obviously who knew how to service equipment.
Yeah.
It's those sorts of things. You can't do projects on your own without needing all this equipment. And if we actually had something like that as a resource, you pay, I think it's £20, and to be a member, and then you can hire anything for a week, and you have to return it if it needs a new blade or whatever. But that's it.
Yeah.
So and you can, it's just.
Yeah, some areas find them really, really effective.
And I saw, because I was looking, there was one advertised in Norwich as coming soon kind of thing, but I don't know how long or
how soon is now.
How soon is soon, yeah. But it's just that idea of those resources. The other thing that kind of struck me too was the fact that we've tried, as a result of your talk, Rupert, and getting those things going, that made me think about what we could do in our village.
Right.
So, I've got the newsletter going again.
Oh, great! Well done.
And we've got the parish council have taken on an area of land which was poor law land. And they've taken the tenancy of it, and we've started cutting it and. Mike's single-handedly scythed it and made hay out of it. But, that's right in the centre of the village now.
Our parish wildflower meadow.
Fantastic, well done. Brilliant, that's encouraging.
And we've had quite a lot of support. So one of the things that your meetings gave me was that sense of I wasn't alone. And also some ideas about what we could do.
Brilliant.
So I'd sort of and felt slightly that because it was community orientated, not climate, slightly, I don't know. But hearing that's what we need to do is really motivating for me.
Yeah.
Because I see it as the way in my community. Yeah. If we talk about wildlife, and what we can do for the community, then people are really quite.
There are lots of ways in, right? And they often overlap. There's climate, there's nature, there's community, there's health, there's food, right?
But it felt slightly, I wouldn't say underhand in a way. I thought, go on, don't say anything because if I say the word climate change, that nobody will come. But if I say that wildlife stuff, that they might well come.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of particularly the older people in the village, Mike's had people who had seen that piece of land cut in that way before.
Oh yeah.
Got off his tractor and came in and said it was amazing to see somebody doing it that way again.
Yeah.
And so it's a lot in people's memories, but it's fading.
Yeah.
So we're getting support from it.
Great.
I think they laugh because we're out there, sweating, and they're just they just drive past away. But that's fine. As long as they don't stand in our way, then that's a positive. But it's just.
I think we should re-explore the community orchard bit, which we tentatively thought about. We haven't really identified.
But the other thing I think is that a lot of people would leave their front garden a bit more if somebody would help them deal with it. Do you see what I mean? So if we had more reciprocating mowers and stuff, they leave their grass to go along, but they get worried about how they're going to cope with it all.
Yeah, and this of course is something which South Yare Wildlife Group can help with in a small way with the signs, right? The signs of...
But also, if I could get enough people, or we had a library of things and we had mowers, then we might be able to persuade people to leave it longer if we could then get enough people to go in and cut it for them.
Yes.
That instead of... So it's more having some wildlife-friendly gardeners going.
Yes.
To kind of break that, it's got to look like this.
And that makes sense, and that could be connected with, can we kind of influence a bit groups like the Rockland Gardening Group, and then there's Norfolk Organic Group, which Juliet's in, which is great on this sort of stuff. Michael's been waiting very patiently. Let's go to Michael, and then we've got, yes.
Yes, thank you, Rupert, for your few words and what you said this evening. One or two things. There is a car share facility on the net which has been going for 15 or 20 years. It's based in Norwich. I think it's actually called Car Share. It stemmed from commuting from university, and this Car Club. Both of them fill the gap that we're talking about. Car share is much more flexible, because if you want to run in Norwich, that's available. If you want to share a lift to King's Lynn, that's available as well, or Birmingham. So it's a very significant organisation. I think 30 or 40 software team based in Norwich, so that facility's there. The point raised about community hubs for power, solar panels for power, that is in Norwich Corporation and Norfolk County Council's 25-year plan, and they have located, I think, 6 or 8 areas of Norwich where there are industrial buildings which could feed a grid for that immediate community within 1,000 yards, or something like that. So all these things are happening, and they are all constructive. What we talked about this evening is a huge problem with local approach to how to address it.
Yeah.
And I think everybody who's here tonight has an undercurrent in their intellect, in their daily reflection times, of real concern. I think I can look back 60 and 70 years, I can hear the noises in the school corridors, I can smell the school meals, and that's slightly longer than some of the other people here tonight. But we know what's happened, and it's condensed into a period of less than 200 years. And the fear is that we're reaching now a tipping point, and we've got to get off our backsides and do something about it. And that is a huge challenge. I actually think we know what the problem is, and we can predict what will happen. Because evolution and nature are much more powerful forces than we are and mankind is. We will respond to our climate, we will respond to our food supply and our water supply. Norfolk County Council have got in their plan 45,000 more houses in the next 25 years. It is madness. It is unrealistic. We know where the pressures come from. All the incidents around the world of civil unrest and these wars going on are completely obscene. But human nature is driving that. And we will and we must reduce our populations. And if that's going to be squeezed into a short time scale, that is a very frightening thing to say. If it was spread over 18 generations with a reduction world population of 1 or 2 or 3%, it's astonishing what those figures will produce. But we are closer to the tipping point than we choose to openly admit. And I'm sure some of the things that you have read, which are not necessarily in the public domain, and I know Andrew Watkinson in Ellington, there is a concern, and nature will drive it through. And the best way is to do it peacefully. Because I think it will be done by global events, and although I can look back 50 years, I look forward with tremendous concern about the world we're handing over to the next generation. And the Bishop of Norwich gave a talk at Bunwell last October time, and he was talking about the Church of England approach to global warming. I was really excited to go to that meeting because he has been asked by the Archbishop of Canterbury to draft some ideas.
Yeah.
In fact, out of his lecture, nothing really happened, and yet he's got 1,000 pulpits. And I was really disappointed. But we do, I believe, privately, we do know one of the routes which will solve, and that's global population pressures.
Yeah. So, Michael, thank you so much for those heartfelt and extensive remarks. So there's a lot there. I'll just say a couple of things, and then we'll go to the next question or comment. One thing is that, yeah, part of what I was trying to do in my talk here this evening, as I've done in the past, is to sort of further kind of break the taboo around naming just how difficult our predicament now is, and therefore how much we have to think not just about, oh, let's reduce greenhouse gas emissions and so forth, but about bracing for impacts, preparing for potential disasters, about building psychological resilience, community resilience, food resilience, etc. So yeah, I'm very much with you there, and I also agree with you that it is, let's put it this way, the population, the human population that we've allowed the level of it to increase to in the world is a systemic risk. And to those who say, oh, well, that sounds a bit anti-human, part of my response is to say, well, ask the wildlife what they would like, you know, and the answer is not hard to come by. The shrinkage of wildlife across the world, including very much in this country, which is so nature depleted, has been absolutely enormous, and that is fundamentally to do not just with population pressures, it's also to do with industry and advertising and the ideology of consumerism and technological innovation. But if you have a population as huge as the population we now have of human beings and our domesticated animals, there just isn't room for very much wildlife at all. That's very simple to calculate and see. So yes, we need to consider these things carefully, and then we need to consider carefully, and this is where you started, what we can do about them and what promising green shoots there are that we can build on.
I'm not sure how relevant it is, but listening to you were saying about community rather than climate change, you know, it seems to encourage people. I was thinking about the men's shed. I've been reading something about the men's shed seems to be very, very popular, and something on those lines about the machinery you were saying, you know, the lawnmowers and so on. Could something be set up locally to help, you know, sort of, with that? I mean, it seems very, very popular in the shed. They're helping each other and encouraging, and loads of people go, loads of men go anyway. And the other thing I thought about Rupert was, I wonder why our MP hasn't been invited tonight to listen, you know, to us.
Yeah, we probably should have invited him actually. Yeah. Well, we are videoing it, so let's send him the video. Yeah.
You know, if we're going to keep them to their promises, you know, and
yeah. And part of the point I was making is it's not just about keeping them to their promises. We need to get them to go way beyond their promises, which is going to be harder. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that was it.
Right, yeah.
So I did email our MP
right.
and put all our meetings on for the next...
Including tonight?
Yeah.
Oh, right, well done. So he was invited, technically.
I didn't have a response. I've been waiting for a response and I've no response.
No, okay. So we'll hassle him with the recording.
Well, I guess when Parliament's sitting, they'll be in London.
Yeah, so the Parliament's just started again, so it would be a difficult night for them to come tonight.
Hi.
I was just going to pick up on what Rose said about circles of influence.
Yes.
Because here is somebody who's not a great gardener, not great at planting trees. You can feel quite excluded from what activities a community could do. And I remember when I came last time, we talked about the role the arts can play.
Yes, yes.
So you were saying you could model certain behaviours in a soap would be fantastic to normalise it. So I was inspired by that and have gone away, and we're going to have a book called Children for Change. It's going to every primary school with lots of stories about how to model.
Do you want to pass that around, Amanda?
Yeah, sure. And what I think I want to say is that maybe we need to engage people to bring what they can bring.
Absolutely,
to the table,
absolutely.
rather than the idea that people might feel excluded from an orchard or a bit of gardening and all that kind of thing, which I feel slightly excluded by. I mean, we have a garden and I love cooking, but that's kind of not my big interest, my thing. And also for younger people, I did a project with fast fashion and sustainability. That's one of the biggest CO2 emitters. And, you know, things like that we could have community ideas around. So people aren't continually buying fast fashion, you know, learning to mend. I don't know. But there's just so many areas. And I feel that we need to sort of think about that people have got different skills.
Totally, totally. So can I speak to that? Because I couldn't agree more. So I hope that we've given a bit of a sense this evening of what some of those different things might be, right? But only some of them. So great ideas have been mentioned. Could we have a library of things? Could we have a community car share? Those are things people could set up. Then there was the kind of documenting and recording idea, which is a very different kind of skill, right, which is a bit closer perhaps to your skill set, Amanda. And then there's the stuff about, well, what if we got some, you know, some land and created a bigger community orchard or whatever. In the Climate Majority Project, the way we see this, and I'd really love this to land with everybody, is that everybody has a potential superpower along with other people to make a real difference to some aspect of this. But what that superpower is quite different for different people. So for some people it's going to be to do with their influence or networks. For some people it might be their money. For some people it might be their artistic skill. For some people it might be their organizational drive. For some people it might be their green fingers. For many people it's going to be very local. But for some people like me, it will be local, but also national or international. For young people, it might be to do with their voice, right? This was the incredible power that the school climate strikers had a few years ago. Right? It was basically by just saying, look, we don't have any power, but we are here to say, you bloody well need to do something because it's our future and it'll be too late by the time we're grown up. So you know, it was that kind of voice and that sense of vulnerability that was their incredible power in that. So even people who feel like they don't have any power, that even that absence of power can itself turn into a kind of power. And that's what I think everyone needs to do is ask yourself, have I found what this superpower along with other people is yet? And if I have, great. And if I haven't, well, I need to find it, you know. For some older people it might be something to do with sort of testimony or kind of talking about how things have changed or declined or what we need to not forget before the memories fade and so forth, right? So it very, very different things for different people. And yeah, I regard the potential role of artists and creatives as hugely significant, but we all have our potential and quite different huge significance here. And what I would love is for everyone here and everyone watching to think about, okay, so have I found that yet? And if I have, am I exploiting it fully along with other people? Because that's what we need to do. That's exactly what we need to do. So thanks so much for the point. Yeah?
Just to add to that, we had an eco fair last year here in Margaret Mac, and people we had quite a few people who were making their own things. Someone was buying old glasses, pretty crystal glasses from charity shops, and then pouring candle wax in and selling those, and someone was selling their paintings. So it was an interesting model. I think one of the questions for me, I was one of the organisers, was villagers tend to be used to fundraising. Everything is for fundraising for specific things, and that's important. So this event that we organised, it was people had the table, they paid for the table, they sold their wares. It was an eco themed event, and they would take the bit of pocket money for Christmas towards Christmas. So I see a lot of people trying to sell, and I'd love to do a clothes swap. A friend of mine did a clothes swap in Norwich, and that's really successful. That was a fundraiser, and of course that is then thinking a bit more about sustainability and fashion.
Yeah, and there's an organisation called Do Norfolk, and they're very good at coming to give talks. They work with art students, we've done fashion shows, all sorts of things. And it is part of the changes we can make, which I feel might engage younger people more. Because I think it's about engaging different age groups. Because I think they buy a faster turnover of fashion often. So once they know what's going on, it can change people's decision making.
And aside, I was buying a fashion magazine, one of my guilty pleasures, in the post office up the road, and the young guy behind was studying fashion at college. So yeah, I love to do things that engage a younger generation, and obviously raise and do a lot of that.
So we need to move towards a conclusion now. So last few questions or comments, and someone might want to put on the kettle or something for the refreshments. Andy.
I was going to say, I think if you look at an awful lot of the points that people have raised, which actually it is the networking and the communication between people is the most important. And if we look at society in the past, people regularly got together. People got together to drink beer. They got together to celebrate various things and just to meet one another. And I think one of the most pernicious aspects of modern society is how communities have been fractured and broken down. Everything. And I think if you're going to have an event that is associated with quite unpleasant kind of either conscious or subconscious topics like climate change and just change, then people, their hackles will automatically go up. But if you say we're going to have a get together and people are going to swap cuttings for fruit trees, they're going to talk about various things. And I think it doesn't necessarily need to be quite so target focused. I think if you can just have more community meeting together, then some of these things will happen. So I've got various tools, I've got various things. Someone says to me, oh, I need this, and I think that quite an organic way, and it's fun, and it will allow people to join in. And it also means that then other people can say, well, I'm going to just having a party, why don't you guys come along, and we're having a vegan hog roast or whatever. And
These things are important. I mean, that's part of what I was trying to get at in what I said earlier. And I think we all know this, and we all sense it, and we all feel it. There's a hunger actually for community, right? It's important that we have that we gather together around fires more, and on the nature reserve, and the wassailing, and the 5 mile network, and the planting community orchards, and the pruning community orchards, and we need to be recognizing the multiple ways in which these things are important, and basically the more of them we have, the more that kind of strength of kind of community and bonds will be there. And we may really need that. We may well, in my view, really need it.
And I think it allows some of these networks to re-establish that in times gone past, these systems and processes were local. So you knew someone who could, had an anvil and, had a forge, or you knew someone who knew how to, Jerry rig your Massey Ferguson tractor, or you know, all of these things.
Yeah.
And the loss of complexity that we're faced with will be significantly less traumatic if there are parallel systems that we can rely on.
Yeah, what Andy means by loss of complexity is that if there is some kind of partial societal collapse, things will become more simplified, that some of the complex systems we depend on will no longer be available, and that we need to have structures that are to some extent in place to guard us against that loss of complexity kind of knocking us out, and to make it possible for us to carry on doing stuff, including, you know, fairly complicated stuff, hopefully, like having electricity and so forth, if that happens. I think you're absolutely right.
Well, I mean, I've got a huge collection, a moderately large collection of 1930s books on wiring electrics and how to fix stuff. So I could wire an armature from kind of copper wire, and it's funny how little things like that, it's just a kind of thing that I've collected over the years. But little bits of fractal information like that, along with people's skills and tools and their other interests, you know, you can very quickly start to build a resilient system without having to put effort in to maintain it, other than regularly having booze ups or, you know, cake baking or gardening, all of which I enjoy.
Yeah. Good. Any final points? Yes, sir.
If you go back 30, 40 years and more, people talking about and having interest in the environment and green issues and so forth would be very much the minority, perhaps regarded as being cranks and tree huggers and all the rest of it. That's changed hugely. Yeah. And now it's now commonly understood and mainstream. Most people, to some extent or other, have a much better awareness and more interest and more concern about it.
Yes.
But we've not seen that reflected in the success of people like the Green Party.
Yes.
It's not been happening. We haven't had that movement.
Not nearly enough.
Why do you think that is?
Okay, so that's another huge question which I'm not going to attempt to answer fully. One thing I'll say is that people haven't felt the pressure to actually do it yet, but that is starting to change. You know, every time something like Hurricane Milton, this terrible hurricane that's happening right now, happens, there are more people who at least know somebody who has been in a genuine climate disaster. Like, for example, I'll give you a completely different example. There are a lot of people of Pakistani heritage in this country. Every single one of those people now knows someone who's been in a climate disaster, because a third of the whole of Pakistan was flooded last year. It's getting closer to us, and we all experience the 40 degrees, and I think it's quite likely that there will be wildfires, serious wildfires in eastern England at some point in the next few years, and we will either be in them or we will know people who are in them. These things are getting closer, and we've been insulated against having to act by our complicated modern society, which has given us a lot of mastery over nature, and by fossil fuels and so on and so forth. But that insulation is starting to break down, and as it does so, there is an enormous opportunity, and the opportunity is to actually get serious. And the further we get ahead of the curve in that getting serious, the better place we'll be. It really is that simple. Now, the great hope we have in the Climate Majority Project is based in exactly what you say, that actually loads of people now, opinion polls are very clear about this, loads of people now are really concerned. The majority of people are concerned. And you can get, for example, if you ask young people, it's off the scale. Like half of young people say that their daily functioning is affected by climate anxiety. Their daily functioning. Half of young people. This, of course, is one of the reasons why there is an epidemic of mental ill health among young people. Well, of course, you have to be careful here, because actually climate anxiety isn't mental ill health. It's actually rational, it's sensible. If you're not scared sometimes, you're not paying attention. So more people are starting to pay attention. But until they get pushed to do so, not enough people are going to pay attention, but we have to accelerate that process. We have to accelerate that process by helping people to imagine what it's going to be like. We have to accelerate that process by showing people the co-benefits. You know, how actually you don't have to be just worried about the climate, you can also be excited about building community and having some delicious local food and so forth. And we have to model it, we have to model what's possible. And we're starting to do that, but we have to step it up. So, was there one more hand that was, yes?
Yeah, I just had a final thought about part of our climate resilience or our resilience as a community, and one thing we haven't really talked about apart from Andy talking about the electrical skills and Amanda about sewing and clothes and things, was part of the resilience is learning practical skills.
Absolutely.
I think that the way that education's going, children are not learning those practical skills in school. They're learning a lot of things that are really abstract, that, you know, you could find out at the point of need on any device, but they're sort of cramming it all in and trying to remember it, and, you know, not learning how to cook food, not learning how to mend clothes. And, you know, maybe that's something we can do, is have some way of sharing practical skills, because I think that's a massive gap. And I
absolutely
come and learn to sew a patch on properly, for example. Recently, children at Forest School wanted to make quills for their arrows, so we had to learn how to do the blanket stitch to kind of show how to make
brilliant
quills, and they absolutely loved it, and we loved it, and we're like, oh, why don't we do sewing all the time? Well, because I don't need to, because I can just go and buy something, but it's a very wasteful way to be. And I'd love it if we had like a community sewing event, or I think that would be really fun.
It's a brilliant point you make, Rose. So you can ask AI, you know, tell me about chemical bonding, or tell me about, you know, the plantagenets or something. But AI can't sew a button on for you. You know?
Properly, or drawing gloves, or you know, all of those things.
They're all going to be the jobs.
With the 5 Mile Network, I hope that we will do something we've talked about, but we haven't really done so far, which is stuff on food preservation. I think this is a big area of skill that could be really important in the future. A lot of older people know about it. Some of that knowledge is being lost. I think that's something that could be a really good thing for next year. I'm just going to say a couple of quick things in summary, and then we'll devolve into, you know, drinking tea and being convivial and having biscuits and stuff in the way we've been talking about. So, you know, let's follow up on some of this. Some of it, I think we're clear about some of the possible follow-ups. I think the documenting, recording idea and the ripples thing, that's really exciting. You know, if someone can see a way of making some of the bigger ideas that were mentioned, like Library of Things, whatever happened, great. You know, possibly we can look at funding from the housing stuff. Then there's other big ideas like the community power idea. I want to urge you to think of people yourselves who have taken the effort and the time to turn up here this evening as, whether you like it or not, kind of community leaders who can help to make some of this happen entrepreneurially, in just, you know, the social entrepreneurship sense, and that we do frankly have a responsibility to ourselves and to the future to try and do some of this, and to try to do this, which I spoke about in response to Manda's vital point. And if we do some of this, and if we maybe, you know, make some progress over the next year or so, I'd love to talk to anyone who is interested in acquiring some serious amount of land potentially, if that's the kind of thing I think we should be really thinking about and aiming towards. It's a big idea which will cost some money, but could be really, really worth it in terms of what it will repay to us over the coming decades. If we do some of this, we will be safer. We will, I think, be proud, and also really important, as we've said, we will have fun. So on that note, I propose that we stop and go and drink and be convivial.
Okay, so can I say thank you to Rupert for hosting this meeting? Cheers.
And thank you, Ms. Afia.
Started off being a bit doom and gloomy. It's given us hope that the community, our local community, we've got the ideas, we've got the way of spreading those ideas around. So thank you.
Thank you.